of what's called redshift and Doppler redshift.
Now I want you to watch
We
this.
can measure the fact that the universe
In light of
is
this new
rapidly
pyramid
expanding.
discovery.
So we're just building upon that foundation to discussion, and now we can go into talking about the ripping of the veil or the rending of the veil, much like happened with the temple.
What about quantum tunneling? I know Tim wanted me to ask you that. How does quantum tunneling play into all of this?
Quantum tunneling, it means essentially
See how it's pushing that energy up again?
Moving a signal. I'll get into more detail, but you're moving a signal from one dimension to another dimension.
Listen.
You're moving from one quantum state through a barrier, an energy barrier, to another quantum state. So the way that I would ask people to picture this is related to how the quantum computer made by D-Wave Corporation, called the adiabatic quantum computer, that means without heat transfer.
Demon machine.
You'll even find this at their website.
This is how they communicate with demons.
So essentially, you might call it a mountain. It's a peak. At the bottom, it has a wide base, and it goes up to a fine point at the peak. So you have basically a pyramid. And on one side of this base, you have a digital signal. This base is what's called a combinatorial program, a digital program that sends an electric signal through the base of this pyramid. That pyramid is an energy barrier, which represents a dimension, a dimensional barrier. It sends the signal through the base of that pyramid to the other side. So it pierces through, it tunnels through that energy barrier. Now, the reason that I say that it goes through the base and call it quantum tunneling, which is the accurate word, it's not my word, is that it is a shorter route to the other side of the energy barrier, to the other dimension. Instead of climbing all the way up one side of the mountain or the pyramid, over the peak, and back down the other side to the other dimension, which requires tremendous amounts of energy and takes a lot more time.
Did you just hear what he said?
Quantum scale time. The short
tremendous amount of energy
right
it takes
through the base. Now, if we scale that up, there is the dynamic. There is the scenario in which the strangelets we talked about come into play. That's a graphical representation of a process that takes place, as I said, without heat, adiabatic, without a heat transfer, which means that they are able to maintain stable coherence of a signal. In computer programming and in computer operation, the worst thing that can happen is a loss of coherence, because then that brings in errors to your computational process. If you can maintain coherence, a steady state signal in a computer, then your ability to achieve a near perfect, near defect-free solution to a problem can be achieved. So they have a computer that operates in a super cold state, superconductive, not using any heat transfer, and it's shielded by a box. It's shielded from outside electromagnetic interference, like microwaves and radio signals. And the point here is we are going to make the leap from the quantum computer to the Large Hadron Collider and the opening of the portal as the two mechanisms only vary in scale. The processes are nearly identical. That's why I give you the graphic representation of a pyramid or a sharp.
I swear, man, this is in light of the new discovery under the pyramids. I think they're tunneling something. They're trying to use big energy for something.
It's going to open the portal.
What is your opinion on when they get ready to tear the veil? I know that you said that they've done their proof of concept. They can tear the veil whenever they're ready. So what do you think when they tear the veil? How long will the veil open? How is the Birkeland currents going to be connected at that point? How is the plasma field going to envelope? How does all of that actually look like?
The time in which the portal is open, the time in which the Birkeland currents are connected to Saturn, will be very short. I think we're looking at just a matter of just a few seconds in duration. The reason I'm kind of speaking slowly and deliberately is that it is important to understand what time is on a quantum scale. Normally in physics, when we're talking about things that are happening at the quantum scale, we're talking about things that happen almost, in our frame of reference, instantaneously. But you can break that down further and talk about picoseconds and nanoseconds. Those are the normal time frames in which things are transmutating in terms of changing from one element to another, for example, or when you're rearranging quarks. These are things that are happening very quickly. And the duration of stability of a quark gluon condensate typically, as I said, is only in nanoseconds, but now has moved up to stability of several minutes. In some literature, I've read that they've been able to have stable strangelets for as long as an hour. I say all of that so that people have a frame of reference. When I say a minute to 2 minutes to several minutes in which the portal is open, that's an eternity in comparison to picoseconds.
You see, now imagine the energy going up.
The reason that I say this is going to be a minute to several minutes in which the portal is open is because of the amount of digital information that is going to travel from one dimension into our dimension. The transmitting of digital information, people can understand if you relate it to electricity or the speed of our computers. Our computers move very quickly in terms of moving electrons and the sharing of data, the sharing of digital information. This is what I'm talking about with the portal in terms of digital information being transmitted from one side to the other through this quantum tunneling that we're going to spend a little more time talking about.
Hey, that's the same thing, dude.
We're talking about a long duration of time when we're talking about quantum levels of time. And we're talking about, therefore, massive amounts of digital information that will be transmitted during this, let's say, eternity of time, scaling from the quantum time scale up to our time scale of several minutes. And then the portal's going to close.
So when the portal closes, are they still connected to Saturn?
No. The reason for the portal is to be able to communicate with Saturn, to the prison planet. It is to allow these entities that are in Saturn to move into our dimension. So think of the dimensional barrier, that energy barrier that you're going to quantum tunnel through. That barrier existing physically between the Earth and Saturn, but the entities that are in Saturn reside in a different dimensional state. Because they're in a different dimensional state, we have to open an interdimensional portal for them to physically travel from Saturn through that portal. And as they move from Saturn to the opening of the portal, they're moving from their dimension into our dimension. Think of it in this way. They're operating in a different timeline at Saturn. When they come to Earth, they're in our timeline.
Right.
Now, that's just so that people have a way to reference one dimension to another. And the reason why they have to have a gateway, a portal, to allow them to come here to move along those Birkeland currents that we've talked about, that actual conduit that will extend from the Earth to Saturn. But they have to have that portal open so they can change them from their time frame, their dimension, into our time frame, our dimension.
Yeah, everything's adding up to me.
To the other.
So the quantum computer is basically, to me, it's a sky computer. It can go in any direction at once. It's very powerful. How does it work as far as the entities? What are they like when they would come through? I mean, how do they communicate with them? Are they like technical energy?
Yeah, we're talking digital signals. The entities themselves, I do believe, have a physical form. If we're talking about entities, and from our Christian standpoint, when we look at things through the lens of Christianity and biblical scripture, our relationship with Jesus Christ, these entities in the other dimension, which we are forbidden to contact in any manner,
Right.
they have any interactions with. They are physical entities. They are also spiritual. Here's a little bit of a diversion, a little footnote. There is a thing in quantum physics that is known as the particle duality, or the theory of duality, meaning that a particle can also be an energy wave.
Right. It can
And an
exist
energy
in two
wave
states
can
of matter.
also be a particle. The critical thing to understand is that they are both an energy wave and a particle.
Physical and spiritual.
The fact that you have the theory of duality, you can apply that to our discussion now of who's on the other side of this barrier, because they are both an energy wave, which is a spirit, and they are also a physical form, which is a particle at the same time. Now, for people that are not familiar with physics, that may be hard to understand in a practical sense. But if you'll just accept the notion that something can be both spiritual and physical at the same time, both a
Aren't you?
and a particle at the same time, then you're going to be able to understand what I'm about to talk about in terms of what's on the other side and how is it going to move into our realm of existence. The quantum tunneling we sort of talked about as far as going through the base of the pyramid, and we were talking about the adiabatic quantum.
You keep saying pyramid, man.
Well, the same thing happens at CERN with the LHC. What they're going to do is to use strangelets to break what's called the strong force. The strong force is one of the elementary forces of the universe. There's also the weak force, but we're talking about strong force that binds at the quantum level nuclear particles. This is a nuclear force that joins particles. It takes a tremendous amount of power to break that nuclear strong force.
Amount of power.
Now, we're not talking about splitting atoms like you think of when people talk about, the atom bomb, which really isn't splitting atoms. But without getting into talking about atom bombs, we're talking about tearing the veil. So when the power that's generated by collisions by the Large Hadron Collider, they keep seeking higher and higher powers. They need to get to a threshold point. They had a threshold point of 10 tera-electron volts to create strangelets. They have a threshold point to open the veil, to break that nuclear bond. They're going to break that nuclear bond using an explosive, using strangelets. But that power level is not in tera-electron volts. That's just for the particle collisions. They literally are going to set off, let's call it a nuclear device, but on a grander scale. You're actually going to use the strangelets as an explosive to break the nuclear bond at the quantum level. So picture something really small, two particles side by side, joined by a nuclear force. You then cut through that nuclear bond. You cut it like a string. When you do that and you separate these particles that are held together, that's opening up a dimensional portal. That's distorting time. If we're to look at Einstein for a guidepost of the distortion of time, or time and how it relates to our frame of reference, our universe here in this dimension, there's a rip in time that takes place when you separate those particles. That rip in time is allowing you to enter into a different timeline. That different timeline is that other dimension. We use time as a measurement tool because our brains are so limited by design that the only way we can really understand dimensions is by using a measurement tool like a yardstick that we call time. Time is linear, it's a straight line. So if we use time as a way to represent another dimension, we are entering that dimension by distorting time. And the distortion is caused by the separation of nuclear particles when you break that strong force. You need an explosive to break that strong force. They have the explosive, they have the strangelets in sufficient quantities, and we call it throwing the switch, but they don't really need to fire up the particle collider in the sense of using it as a collider anymore. They're using it to propel the strangelets and then be able to explode those strangelets at the same time that they're creating this connection between Saturn that we described using the Birkeland currents.
All right, I'm
so
gonna look into this a little more.
Travel across the Birkeland current